All right, so we are recording. See, I would like to be able to zoom on this camera and everything. I'd like to be able to get closer to the board. All right. So where we left off in Jesus' story, we went through the Christmas story. All right. All right. Thank you, George. Do you guys have any questions for me before we begin? All right. So where we left off in the Jesus story. First of all, we understand there's 4 Gospels. 3 of them are considered authoritative in terms of like constructing the narrative of Jesus. We call those the Synoptic Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is a little bit different. So we talked about John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist is kind of like the forerunner to Jesus. Jesus kind of claims that John the Baptist is the Elijah that is promised. He came in the spirit of Elijah, he says. And you remember in Judaism, John the Baptist is supposed to be the guy, or rather Elijah is supposed to be the person to usher in the Messianic age, like that end times in Jewish religion. During Jewish festivals, the door is left open, kind of like inviting, like while they're having the feast, the door is left open, inviting Elijah in, waiting for him to come. Right? That's what the open door symbolizes. So Jesus says that the coming of John the Baptist fulfills that prophecy. So Jesus is born. We saw that there was some like different versions of the birth narrative, but those are blended in what we call the harmony of the Gospels to produce this Jesus story that we know, right? And hopefully we saw some aspects of how his life the birth of Jesus is celebrated and observed today, right? Through the season of Advent, Christmas Eve services, and Christmas services. Along with all the other cultural stuff, Christmas trees and all that. Okay, so John the Baptist starts his ministry. He baptizes Jesus. John the Baptist is a little reluctant, saying, I'm not even worthy to, like basically he says, I'm not even worthy to tie your shoes, right? He uses sandals, but same idea. And Jesus says, let us do it to fulfill all righteousness. Here he establishes the sacrament of baptism, right? Jesus was baptized. So if Jesus had to be baptized, then we know we have to be baptized, right? And then Jesus goes into the wilderness. He's tempted. He has 3 temptations, and then he begins his ministry. The first thing he does, this is the Sermon on the Mount is considered the first teaching that Jesus gives. Oh, okay. Sorry, guys. Give me 1 second. Where do I see? All right. Apologies. So, now some scholars have suggested that. Where are we at? Did it get closed? It got closed. Sorry guys, give me a second, I gotta reopen it. Alright. So this brings us up to speed. This is broadly considered alright, are we good? You guys ready? This is broadly considered like the first teaching of Jesus. Matthew is the only gospel that presents it that way. In the book of Luke, there's what we call a Sermon on the Plain, which is a shorter version of this story, or of these teachings, right? We could think of it. Okay, I'm only going to take a little bit of time. Sorry. And then you guys can continue what you're doing when you're done. Yeah. So, I know you guys have a lot going on right now, but I need a little bit of your time. So, there's a Sermon on the Plain in the book of Luke. It's a shorter version of this. So, there's a few ways to understand it. One is that these are not, this was not actually a single sermon. This is what the textbook teaches that I sent to you guys. A lot of scholars think that this is just a compilation of Jesus' core teachings. So another way to think of it is that Jesus gave this message several times, right? And it was a little different maybe each time. So maybe in Matthew, this is one time that he gave it. In the book of Luke, it's another time that he gave it. There are some significant differences, but we'll talk about those, or a significant difference that we're going to get to today. But we'll talk about those more later. But here we have this whole idea of the harmony of the Gospels again, right? Like this idea that we blend all the Gospel stories together to build a complete narrative of Jesus. One thing that everybody agrees on, Christians, scholars, is that this Sermon on the Mount, so Matthew 5 through Matthew 7, this is 3 chapters altogether, 5, 6, and 7, right? Is the core of Jesus' teachings, right? Like we want to understand really what Jesus taught, we should know the Sermon on the Mount. This is where we should begin, right? So we're going to start with the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes is just the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, and is considered one of the most important teachings of Jesus. It's very concise, and it's some short aphorisms, like some short sayings, that illustrates what it means to be a follower of Jesus, like the correct kind of person that you want to be. All right, so we're going to begin teaching it just by reading through it, and then we'll take some time to talk about it. All right, let me go ahead and I'll get this light so maybe we can see a little better. I don't know if it'll come out better in the recording if I do it this way. And I'll zoom in just a little bit too. Give me 1 second. Hang on. That's not what I wanted to do. So we can make sure we see it well. All right. So, all right, Matthew 5 through 12, or Matthew 5, it says 5 through 12. This is 5 through 12. No, 5, 1 through 12, I apologize, right? All right, so go ahead and follow along with me. I'm going to read it for you. So, now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to a mountainside and sat down. The disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. These are what are known as the Beatitudes. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you falsely, say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." All right, so I want you guys to consider here for a moment some common themes. So obviously there's a pace going on in this. This is the Beatitudes are Jesus is conferring blessings on people. He's saying these people are blessed, right? So I want us to consider the moment for a moment what the blessings are. Like, why are these people blessed, and what stands out to you about what Jesus, like the claim that Jesus is making? Like, blessed are you when this happens or that happens, right? Is there anything strange or different? Consider it for a moment. If you want, you guys should have the file. If you want to read through it, take a moment and do that. Yeah.
What do you mean by strange?
Or is there just like, what is, like, do we notice a pattern here? Like, just anything that stands out to you at all? Like, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Like that statement there, blessed are those who mourn, right? And he's saying that people who mourn are blessed, right? What stands out to us about that statement?
Is that like, for example, like the narrow
Well, I would say that Jesus' teachings all intersect at a certain point. He is kind of laying out a narrow path here, but I don't know if there's like a direct connection.
I think he's like talking like specifically about people who have been like persecuted and like people who are going through like a hard time like because of their belief in God.
Okay, so there's definitely that. Like especially if you go to the end here, he says, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you falsely, right? So for sure, there's this idea that he's comforting people who go through hard times because they follow God. Yeah. But that word blessed, first, do we know what that word blessed means? Fortunate, right? Hey, we could say fortunate, sure.
I just thought that it was like no matter who you are, I think you're still blessed or fortunate, like you said.
Okay, so why do you say no matter who you are?
Because it says blessed in every sentence.
Right, and like some of these might be kind of counterintuitive, I would argue, right? Like if someone's in mourning, would we consider them blessed? No, right? Like why do people mourn? Death. Very good. What else? Because they lost something. Yeah, being in a state of mourning is not traditionally considered a blessed state, right? A fortunate state. Being persecuted, right? Would we consider that, a blessed life? No, right? So he's offering kind of a counterintuitive narrative of what a person's life, who are the fortunate? Who are the people who are living the right way in a sense, right? It's the people who go through these things. Go ahead.
I think he's also kind of saying you guys go through all of this, but then the reward at the end is being in heaven.
Right. So he's also kind of changing their attitudes, right? Because a lot of times, and he's going to go on to say this later on on the Sermon on the Mount. Talking about the Pharisees. He's going to say, don't be like the people who pray in the streets so that everybody can see what you're doing. Because if you do that, you've already received your reward. What's your reward? That people think you're super holy, right? Your reputation is your reward. But Jesus, then he goes on to say, no, pray in private, and then your reward will be in heaven, right? So he says, do these things in secret. Don't do it for your reputation. Don't do it to look good, right? Don't do it to get rewards on this earth. But when you do things, do it to get rewards in the next life, right? So I think that you're absolutely on point when you say that, right? Now, we may have, maybe you guys have heard this already, maybe you haven't. And when we read it, it can be hard to see it at first, but it's really offering. It's proposing a way of living, a way of being, a way of life that is not normal, right? It's proposing a way of life that is, that's not the way that you probably that might have been raised, or reflects people's typical desires. Nobody wants to mourn, for example. Nobody wants to be persecuted, right? But nobody wants to be poor in spirit, or meek, right? Meek is small, humble, not great, But he's saying that those are the people who are blessed, right? So he's challenging the attitudes of people, you want to follow me if you want, if you want to live correctly, you got to change the way you see things. You got to change your perspective. You got to change your attitudes, right? So it could be attitudes. Go on.
These are also to encourage, you have to accept that the world is suffering, life is a Russian.
So, there is this concept in Christianity that suffering is good. There is a concept there. Now, I don't know that it's necessarily that you have to accept that life is suffering, but it says there's a Christian teaching that says when you suffer, you have communion with Christ because he suffered. He lived a life of suffering. So if we're suffering for the same reasons that Jesus suffered, then you're probably doing things right. So like suffering is part of the package, I think. But I think the point is not so much that the suffering itself is good, even though there is this idea that like suffering is a purifying event. It reforms you, it challenges you, it changes you. Especially when you're suffering for doing the right things. Right? For doing these things, for being merciful, right? For being pure in heart, for being a peacemaker, for being righteous, for seeking righteousness. There is there is a purifying element to that, but the emphasis of this is like to think of the blessing part. Like I have something to look forward to. I have hope in the kingdom of heaven, right? Like God sees with it. Like I should seek my I should put my hope in God and not in the things like that this world is going to give me. So like why are the mourn blessed? Well, because they'll be comforted, right? Who's going to comfort them? God, right? God comforts those who mourn. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, right? Like usually it's not the meek who inherit the earth. Who inherits the earth? The strong. Exactly. But who are they going to inherit the earth from? From God, right? If you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you'll be filled. Who's going to fill you? God's going to fill you, right? So we see a pattern here, right? And the basic message is, don't seek the things that the earth is given, like that people typically want, like seek spiritual things. Put the kingdom of God first, and then God will give you everything else that you need. So it's even this, like, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Usually the person who needs to show mercy is not the person who needs mercy, right? Like usually the powerful are the ones who give mercy. The powerful give mercy and the weak need mercy, typically, right? But who are they going to be shown mercy by? Right? God's going to show them mercy. So maybe in the day of judgment or whatever. So we see that the Beatitudes, the whole point of it is that it takes, and this is like the very basic foundation of Jesus' teachings, that we see the world wrong, right? That the things that we want, we need to change our attitudes, towards the things that we want. And finally, there's this last benediction here. Right? Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you falsely, say all kinds of evil things against you because of me, right? And that because of me is critical, right? Because he's encouraging people, follow me, live the way that I'm going to live, because these are the ways that Jesus is going to live, right? Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, right? For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you, So the holy people, they don't think you're going to be any different from the holy people that came before you. They were persecuted, and if you want to live like they did, you'll be persecuted too, right? So this, I would say that the kingdom of heaven, it starts with the kingdom of heaven, and it ends with the kingdom of heaven, like those little aphorisms at the beginning, right? So the whole point of this is that Jesus is establishing, like, this is what the kingdom of heaven is going to look like. What do we mean by the kingdom of heaven? This is kind of a complicated concept, the kingdom of heaven in the Bible. I think the short answer is, like, most Christians would say that there's two versions of that, right? The kingdom of heaven refers to heaven itself, right? Like the place where God is in charge fully. He doesn't share power with anyone. Like, there's like kings on earth, right? So the kingdom of heaven is like literally the place where God has direct authority. Like, God always has direct authority, right? But he allows people to have autonomy with it, right? Heaven itself, right? Not complicated. Like heaven as you understand it. Like that's one way to think of the kingdom of heaven. But the other version of the kingdom of heaven is like like heaven on earth right now, right? And that's what Jesus is claiming to bring. So he's saying basically that, like, he's bringing this kingdom of heaven now. And, there's a passage that says, the kingdom of heaven is coming, but I tell you that it's already here. And obviously God is not on earth like ruling the entire world with a single government, right? So what do we mean that God is already here, like the kingdom of heaven is already here? Most Christians, I think, would understand that as the church. Establishing like this attitude, right? Like establishing a society that reflects these truths, that reflects these desires. So, Catholicism is definitely the Catholic Church, but I think most Christians would understand it just as like the greater church community in general, right? And that's what the church community should be like. So, how should we understand the kingdom of heaven? Basically, he says it's like a kingdom that's upside down. Like the things that we want in this world are not the same things that we should want. Like if you're seeking the kingdom of heaven, then you should change the way that you think of things. So, all right. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and we see already here. If you read the textbook, I'm not going to read it for you. I'm not going to cover it. But this is like an academic, objective perspective of Jesus' teachings here, and they mention. Like the regular world, the Roman world, as we would understand it, like the priorities of the society at the time. But Jesus even mentions this, right? So I have here a few other Bible verses, and I'm just going to go through these. We'll talk about them, and then we'll be done. Okay? There's some Bible verses here that expand on this idea of the kingdom of heaven and how it's counterintuitive. It's not the way that you would think. You guys know what that word counterintuitive means? Like things seem natural, but it's like not a natural way to think of something. So, all right, first, this is where he addresses like the way society is at the time versus the way that God thinks it should be, right? And this story starts off in an interesting way because we see that the disciples are always, Jesus's like followers always want to like have glory, right? And they don't really live up to that standard of what the kingdom of heaven is, So if we want to think of like the disciples as like the counter example of the kingdom of heaven, they're often presented that way, which is kind of interesting because these are the people that Jesus chooses to spread his message, and they just don't get it, right? Like in the Gospels, it just shows them not getting it. So here, Matthew 20 through 22, and all this is NIV, by the way, New International Version. I think I've said this before, but I always choose NIV because it's a pretty faithful translation, but it's easy to understand. All right. So then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, kneeling down and asked him a favor. And Jesus asked her, "What do you want?" And Jesus said, "Grant me that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." Right? And then Jesus says, "You do not know what you're asking." Jesus said to them, can you drink the cup I am going to drink? We can, they answered. Right? So first of all, like their mom starts asking favors of Jesus for them. Right? Like, please glorify them with you. But then Jesus says, like, if you want to be glorified with me, you got to like go through everything I'm going to go through. So that's why he says, can you drink from this cup I'm going to drink? Crucifixion, suffering, stuff like that. And they said, yeah, sure, we can. They don't know what they're agreeing to, right? And then Jesus said to them, "You will need to drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." Right? And this is critical here, right? When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. They were angry with them because they were trying to they were going over their heads, right? Saying asking Jesus, taking their mom with them, saying, "No, we want to be like the best, right? We want to have the seat of honor." So then he said, you know that the rulers over the Gentiles, and now this is where he's addressing Roman culture, right? Like the society of their day. He says, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Right? So we see here, like they're all fighting for the top position, right? But what's Jesus' answer to them? It's in here. Like, it's a summary. Like, what does Jesus tell them? Like, they're all fighting for the top position to be considered number one, right? What does Jesus say to them?
It's kind of saying like, oh, those who are like below you must be like first than you, since you're like you're kind of being greedy and you want to be first. That's not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So he's saying, you know, if you want to be great, be a servant, right? If you want to be first, be a slave, right? And then at the end, he goes on to say, this is the example I'm setting for you, right? He said, the Son of Man, referring to himself, okay, did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life for a ransom for many, right? So Jesus is here saying, now notice, they're talking about the kingdom of heaven, like up in heaven, right? Like as we understand heaven. But then Jesus comes here and and is he talking about like living life in heaven? What it's going to be like? No, he's talking about life here and now, right? He's saying, you know, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like here. The people, like those who are last will be first. In whose eyes? In the eyes of God. But like while you're living on earth, right? You know, those who are last are going to be first, right? Those who are servants will be the greatest. Those who are slaves will be the greatest, right? Now, is that an ordinary understanding of who's great? Like, are slaves the top of society? No, never, right? They're always at the bottom, right? But Jesus says, look, that's me. I'm a servant. I'm a slave, right? I came here to serve and not to be served. You know, so we see here Jesus setting an example. What does the kingdom of heaven look like? Like, how should you live your life? And we see that, would you guys agree that this reflects the same ideas of the Beatitudes? Yeah, so let's go on. So again, to add to that, this is another story from Matthew, the parable of the mustard seed. And I am, by the way, I haven't forgotten about the Good Samaritan. I know we haven't finished that, but I'm going to circle back to that at the appropriate time. So again, this is Jesus, again, teaching in parables, right? And there's a lot of parables in Matthew. And he compares the kingdom of heaven to a mustard seed. And a mustard seed, if you know about mustard seeds, which I assume most of you don't, it's a very, very small seed, like smaller than a normal seed, okay? Do you guys know what a mustard tree looks like? Ever seen one? What was that? I don't know if it's actual, like, where they get mustard from. I assume it is, but I don't know enough to make a comment on that. But they're enormous, right? The mustard tree is one of the biggest trees in the area at the time, right? So he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field, right? Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches, right? So here again, just Jesus kind of talking to, like, the kingdom of heaven is unexpected. It's small. It's unassuming. You don't notice it, really. But like in that little seed is a lot of power, right? So like the church, we can think of like the church of Jesus' time as like how are like people who are servants and meek and like lowly, you know? How are they going to come to inherit the earth? Right? Remember, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Jesus says, you know, like the point here is that God is going to accomplish that. You know, like there is, like it's unexpected, it's unassuming. It's the opposite of what you think it is. It seems this way, but really it's this way, right? Like it seems like this tiny insignificant seed, but really it's the biggest garden plant. Right? So, continuing Matthew 18 through 1 through 5. At this time, the disciples came and asked Jesus, "Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called the little children to him and placed the child among them. And he said to them, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." So we can see a pattern here, right? And then Luke 18, 15 through 7 is the same story, or like the same type of story. People are also bringing babies to Jesus to place hands on them when the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. So like people were bringing, like, wanted Jesus to bless their children, and the disciples said, "Don't bring children to Jesus," right? But then Jesus called the children to him and said, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Right? And I included this one because it's from the book of Luke. So we could see that these same ideas and these same stories, they're not isolated to individual gospels, right? Like there's a common thread throughout the gospels that connects them. And so this is the last one I have. It's a little bit longer. But this is a really important story, so I wanted to share it here, and it reflects the same idea, right? And again, this is from the book of John, John 13, 4 through 17, right? And this is at the Passover meal, right? So Jesus got up from the meal and took off his outer clothing and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around them, right? He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I am doing, but later you will understand," right? Kind of like the mustard seed parable. Like they don't understand how that enormous tree could come out of a little seed, right? Jesus said, "You do not realize what I'm doing, but later you will understand," right? "No," Peter said, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash your feet, you have no part with me." Then Lord, Peter replied, "Not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well," right? So Jesus answered, "You who have, those who have had a bath need only wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." He's talking about Judas, right? So for he who he knew he was going to betray him. So I probably could have left that out. All right, so 12. When he had finished washing their feet, here's the punchline for you guys, okay? When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. All right? "You call me teacher." I'm trying to follow along here with you guys. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor a messenger is greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Right? You'll be blessed if you do them. So we go back to that word blessed, right? Like if you become a servant. Jesus said, "Look, I have been like a servant to you, washing your feet, like what a servant would do in a wealthy person's house." And he says, "Look, become lowly like me. Serve like I do. And if you do that, you will be blessed." Blessed where? In the kingdom of heaven. Right? In God's eyes. You're storing up treasure for yourself when you die and go to the next place. Right? So this is the message, like the foundational message of the Beatitudes. Jesus teaches a counterintuitive view of life, how we should live. Ultimately, what does it mean to live life in the kingdom of heaven? Like, how do you invite the kingdom of heaven here to earth? Don't live like you would here on earth. Live like you would in heaven. Serve people. Like, choose to be last. Right? And if you do that, that's how you invite the right kind of society, that heavenly society. That's how you cultivate it here on earth. Right? So that you, in a way, make earth a little bit like heaven, or at least like a reflection of it, like what things should be like. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. Do you have any questions for me? All right, so next class we're going to just go to the next part of the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to talk about Jesus and the law, right? And we're going to have an opportunity next class to talk about how Jesus the Jew, like how Jesus understands the Torah, and how he understands the oral Torah. All right. So if there's no more questions, that's all I have for you guys today. I'm very close to having the first part of that note guide out, and you guys will be getting it very soon. I expect to have the whole thing done by before the break. If I don't get to before the break, 100% I will have it done by the time I get back. So I will give myself homework over the break if I don't have it done. So I very much want to get it done before the break. All right, because I don't want homework. All right. So that's it. That's all I have for you guys. If there's no questions, then you're free to work independently. I will go ahead and send you out like the readings for what we're gonna do next class.
For some reason, I got started. Yes, I
I was like,
Oh my god. I don't even know why I got it.
Morning, pardon the interruption.
Go ahead.
Have Sofia Quintanilla with you.
I do.